Welcome back to Joy and Gratitude. We are here to spend some time with you, and I am so excited. I know that we have a topic that often isn't spoken about, but it is really important to discuss. And my co host, Miss Beth Mercurio, will give us the topic for the day.
Hello, welcome everybody. It's Beth. Excited to have you join us. If it's for the first time, and if not, we are excited for you to dive in yet again in topics that help us get untangled. So, Neo already alluded to it, which I love. The topic like we often don't talk about. So it's often in the shadows. It's right behind us. It's this thing that we try to avoid. So today we're not going to do that because Neo and I like to talk about things that people don't always talk about. It's part of who we are and part of what we hope to bring to you. So today we're going to talk about shadows. And I thought, Neo, it would be fun and important to ground us all in what shadows even means. Part of me realized that I say it, I've sort of learned what I think it means, but I went on to kind of get a more formalized definition, and I'd love to share it. I don't always read, but I'm going to read this definition, which is from a psychiatrist, Carl Jung, who sort of framed the term shadow side, and it refers to the aspects of a personality that are repressed or not fully integrated, often containing negative or undesirable traits. And as I mentioned, it was popularized by Carl Jung, who believed that understanding and integrating this shadow is crucial for physiological health and whole wellness. So, I mean, that's a lot, but I think there's something beautiful about this. And as you can imagine, Neo and I really want to talk about it because we believe that wholeness, showing up as our best selves, understanding ourselves, a high level of self awareness, really is what enables us to connect as humans and to show up as the people that we want to be. So I think it's an incredibly important topic. And that hopefully that definition has you already thinking, if you haven't heard of the term, and if you have heard of the term, maybe you've already started to investigate your own shadows. So, Neo, what does shadow and shadow side and shadow work mean for you?
You know, I always like to give an example. And one example that I could think of is when a person is extremely confident, their shadow could be arrogance and not being aware that their confidence is coming off as arrogance. And that has a lot to do with um, the way that we actually not only show up, but the way that we take the time of discussing ourselves with others. So it's how we present. And the
Mm,
shadow can be, you may be not even aware that you have this shadow, but it's when you are working not in authenticity, but really trying to be something that you're not, that the shadow presents. So I want to be confident. I want to be confident. So I'm going to walk into a room and I'm going to be always answering the questions, always pushing my agenda, doing all these things, not seeing how it impacts the other person, not seeing how you are being perceived, and not taking the chance to learn from maybe feedback that you've gotten. So that's one example of how shadows can impact you. Um, what do you think, Beth?
yeah, I love it, and I love your idea of bringing these examples to life because I do think, as a concept, I mean, one of the most important things is it's sort of we don't know it. Some of it is it's blindsided to us until we start to get really aware of it. And then this idea of integrating is owning, blending, knowing where we go sometimes. And so this idea I want to give as an example is, as you've sort of described it. So, sometimes I think really the beautiful thing is our strengths, how we show up authentically when overused become our shadows. So your example of self-confidence, where self-confidence can be an incredibly strong attribute of a professional, of a human, right? That's something that a lot of us aspire to have confidence. That's a beautiful thing. But when it's overused, it can become arrogance. And so similarly, I had a client I was working with, and it was this beautiful moment for me where I saw it so clearly. She has her superpower is asking clarifying questions.
Mm,
So she is incredible about saying, why is that? And why did you choose to do that? And for what reason are we going to do it that way? And oh, that's really interesting. And truly, when she is using it as a strength, it is 100% her superpower. She's curious, she wants to know, and she elevates everybody by asking and probing and getting one idea to like a much better, more expansive, incredible idea. There's no question it is a superpower, the superpower of asking questions, asking clarifying questions. But you can imagine, and this happened to her, and we talked very directly about it, that sometimes if you're asking from maybe a place of skepticism, like maybe you
mm,
actually don't agree, you don't believe in the idea, and you start using your superpower of clarifying questions, well, you can imagine that it shows up very differently and can come across as really like you're doubtful, you don't believe in somebody, you don't support what people are talking about. You can come across as disruptive and not a team player. So you can imagine one level, it's a superpower, and she's raised up in the organization for doing this, and the other is quite the opposite. So I was able to bring her along to say, sounds like there might be a shadow here because the reaction to her questions didn't come off. But we were able to unravel it, to integrate that actually her skepticism was impacting how she was asking the questions. It became clear she was a non believer. And now she's highly attuned to that. So we work on, just like you said, that awareness, saying, wait a minute, where are your questions coming from? Are they coming from a place of curiosity? If so, you're in superpower mode. If they're coming from a place of skepticism, you got to check yourself. Maybe you need to get more information. Maybe you have to think really clearly about how you're going to ask that question so you don't start to offend people. So, this idea of integrating and knowing and becoming more aware and more open. Like, if something doesn't go the way you think it should, I love this idea. Get involved with the other people, right? Start to be like, that didn't go down the way I thought it would. Because typically it goes well for me. Usually I'm confident. Now I'm arrogant, right? Usually I get good feedback for asking questions, and now I'm getting a really terrible response. That can be our little aha moment to go, wait a minute, something here isn't serving in the way that I want it to. And maybe this is an area where I need to do a little bit more work called the inner work of our shadow side.
right. And,
Yeah.
and the other piece is ask for help. Um,
Yes.
Perfect example is Eric Garcia. He writes on social interaction and perceptions and in the autism world. And he basically talks about autistic people have low self awareness, but they're very detail oriented. And that detail orientation is an asset in the workforce because they're able to really hone in on issues, especially if they're analysts and those type of things. However, he brings up that sometimes they get so in the minutia that they actually stop progress. And he said for himself, and he is a high functioning autistic person, he said for himself, what he did was he asked his boss, when I go too deep, give me a sign so I know to pull back to make the room be able to continue to listen to me because I'm relevant, but not be exhausted of my, need to go into such detail. And his boss and him have established a signal, and he never in the article spoke of what the signal is, but a signal that he now knows when he's going too far. And that is something that we all have some form of, I know that I do this too much. I need someone to make me aware. And it is so important that we understand ourselves and give ourselves the vulnerability and grace to have the help to move past these shadows because they always will be there. They change from one thing to another, but you will always have some form of a shadow.
Yeah, and I think this idea of blind spot, right? The word blind spot, and when you talk about asking people to help you, the reality is a blind spot by definition is something that you don't see that other people see,
Right.
right? Think about a car. You said there's a blind spot when you're driving. Other people can see there's a car right next to you, but you just can't see it. And it's a perfect example asking people to help us, to show us, to give us that extra tool. And I giggled. I don't know, people watching might have seen me giggle a little bit when you talked about, having other people tell you or help you in the moment that they see it happening. I can certainly share. Many people listening may have heard or may not of something called an Enneagram.
Mm,
And an Enneagram, lots of people start talking about it. So I bring it up because I'm starting to feel like it's entering the vocabulary a little bit more. Well,
yeah.
people will say, "What's your Enneagram?" I'm like, "Well, you're assuming that everyone knows what that is, right?" But it's sort of a personality test. Organizations are using it to get their teams to really understand each other. So leaders are using it to understand themselves and then everybody that they work with. And the idea is if you understand a person's Enneagram, their number that shows you and tells you how they show up, you can then sort of say, okay, I'm going to go deal with Nio today. Nio is this
Hmm.
number. I know how she operates. I'm going to come in knowing that to better enhance our productivity, our performance, our connection, our collaboration, right? So it's a really cool concept. The Enneagram Institute, you can go look at it online. You could probably run your own little test to see what number you are. But I share that to say I'm an Enneagram 2, which is called the helper. And it's no surprise that like that fits, right? I am somebody who really is very loving and compassionate and loves to help. When I show up as my best self, that's how it comes across: helpful, loving, compassionate. The shadow of that, what an Enneagram would call disintegration, which means when I'm stressed, where I go, I disintegrate to an 8. And the 8 is the challenger, the dominator. And so for me, it's really interesting. I really shift from being this person who wants to help others and wants to be in service to others to somebody who gets into victim mode, gets really angry, can be like throwing stuff out and very aggressive and dominating and controlling. So again, imagine you go from one to the other, and that's exactly what happens because I my shadow is that when I start to feel worthless, then I start to get really frustrated and really angry. But I now know that about myself. So if I start to get frustrated or I start to list all the reasons how I help people, right? And I start to get frustrated that I overextend and I start to put that on other people. That's me disintegrating. That shows me that I'm stressed. That shows me I'm moving into a shadow zone. I am not showing up as a healthy 2, which is what I want to strive to be as a human, right? But I love that when you're in a place that has used this Enneagram to get people to understand each other, oh, I would have people in my workplace say, you're going to an 8 right now. Like flat out, they would just tell me. It would be we'd be in a meeting and they were watching my body language. Everything shifted from me trying to be so. And I've got to be honest with you, I didn't love it when someone would tell me I was moving to an 8. That made me just like more of a challenger. But eventually over time, I saw that as a gift. So if somebody was saying, I feel like you're moving towards an 8, it was like, this is not how you show up as your best self. We're not going to get the best Beth if you continue in this way. And it was really helpful to me. And the helpful part, this is the work I mentioned, the inner work, the integration, is to understand what's happening in the moment that you start to move towards your shadow. So when we talk about shadows, it's not just like, oh, I know what that is. It takes some time to figure out what it is because we don't like them. They're like unacceptable. I don't want to be dominating and controlling and come across as a challenger, but something's happening for me that's making me sort of move to that space. So knowing what it is that makes me feel that way, for me it is a lot around self-worth. So if I'm starting to question my value and I'm starting to feel a little worthless, then I move into this shadow zone for myself and away from a healthy uh, compassionate giver, helper. But I'm saying all this like I knew this. This took a lot of work, but there's such beauty. So I'm highlighting, and there's so many more shadows that keep popping up, right? It's not one shadow, there's different shadows. But I love this idea of kind of trying to understand what they are, trying to see them as that gift. Because once we know what they are, we can then move towards integrating them into our lives, being grateful for them. Gratitude for our shadows is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how about you, Neo?
Well, I think that it's really important that there are also so many other studies. There's the color study, there's DISC. There are many that your organization may use that you can use to identify yourself. But one of the things that you stated that is really important, the common use of getting everyone to understand um, the go to persona that we each have. Now, we all know that we shift from maybe today I'm a pioneer, meaning that I'm very much in visionary mode, to a guardian, which means I need structure, to directive. I am a director. I need to get it done. And, nothing can get in my way. And then we have the social butterfly, right? The integrator. So we will shift in our way of being at all times. However, we do have a personality that is our norm, that usually is dominant. And from there is where you start doing the work of finding out what your shadow is, and understanding you want to know who you show up as when things are tough, because that's what the shadow is. You know, we're all great people when things are good. But when that meeting turns south, when your son or daughter knocks on the door and comes and says, I wrecked the car, who are you then? Because that's the person that you need to work on. That is the person that actually is owning the shadow persona, not the person that's in the good times or the day to day monotony. It's the one that is in the, tough times. And I always like to bring people back to the 90 seconds. We talk about it, we've talked about it a million times before. But if we let ourselves experience the emotion throughout that 90-second period, then we can take ownership of our reaction. But you know, it's hard to believe, but 90 seconds is a long period of time, right? And it's really hard not to be reactive in 90 seconds. And even with your children, they do something, it's almost like you have to count to get through the 90 seconds. So you don't spoil a already difficult situation. And you got to do that same grace for yourself. And
Mhm.
once you get there, then you can actually say to that shadow, not today. No, I don't need to do that. I don't need to behave like that. I'm going to go into curiosity mode and I'm going to learn more. A beautiful example is I was watching this TikTok and this father was talking about his daughter came up to him and said, I want a phone, 13-year-old. And his gut was to react and say, no way in hell are you getting a phone at 13. But he didn't. What he said was, oh, you want a phone? Tell me more. And she went on, and he gave himself that grace. He said, I'm not going to react. I'm going to ask her a question to give myself my 90 seconds. you know? And she said, well, I want a phone because I feel left out. I feel like I don't belong. All my friends have phones. So it really wasn't about the phone, it was about her belonging. And that's a different conversation than I want a phone. But if he would have reacted and let his shadow show up, man, that would have been a very different conversation and experience with his daughter. And he would have never found out the underlying cause of I want a phone. And we can apply that same tactic to our lives, asking ourselves the question of if I react to this, how is it going to impact my future? If I react to this, will there be any value from it? If I react to this, will I get all the information that I need to make a conscious decision? These are simple questions that we have to ask ourselves that gives us the strength to control that shadow. It's always here.
It's always
It's
there.
always here.
Yeah. And we blend with it. So I have a couple things I want to share that really you got me thinking about. Two is I wonder when you were talking about the 90 seconds, which is again, we know like the flow of an emotion. I'm thinking we need to like layer on top of the 90 seconds, or maybe we subtract 5 out of it. But I'm thinking we need to do the 5-second rule, the Mel Robbins 5-second
Mhm.
rule, which is forcing you to just not react because the 90 seconds that's supposed to be as you like flow
Right.
through whatever emotion you're feeling. So part of me is like, okay, Neo, you and I are creating the 85-second plus 5 rule right here on the spot because I think you're right. We're not going to go automatically in this beautiful way and go, I'm going to feel my night. No. First, we got to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 5-second rule by Mel Robbins to just not react immediately, which is what this beautiful man did that you described, right? He did not react immediately. He took the 5 seconds to make a new choice. He created space to say, I'm not going to do my default reaction. And then you are allowed to then now then he probably even had a switch of emotion
Mhm.
because what information he got him to maybe he felt differently once he knew his daughter didn't feel like she belonged, right? She wasn't feeling entitled and all those things that maybe he was feeling a different emotion. So I would love us to kind of create this new 85 plus 5. We'll call it something. We'll get creative, but that layers those two things together because I think that's the power. Don't immediately react and then allow yourself that time to feel. And I just I feel like I want to say again this idea of blending and knowing. And once you know what they are, your capabilities. So there's something beautiful. Like your shadow is beautiful. It's doing something that allows you to get back to who you really want to be as a human. And I think when I use the client that I described earlier, where her clarifying questions were a superpower until overused, a strength overused, becoming a major shadow for her with impact,
Yeah.
right? But what we realize is when she knows it and she can see it and she understands the difference, because you mentioned value, you were asking a question about if I react, what will the value be?
Mhm.
And for her, it's so clear that when she overuses her strength, there's no value.
Mm-mm.
She loses all value. People don't even kind of want to listen to her. They get really frustrated. When she uses it as a strength, the value is unbelievable.
Mhm.
So now we call it like this circle. And she's able to visualize she needs questions, clarifying questions in order to believe. And once she believes, she can inspire. So this is like her own personal circle where she goes, am I asking the questions because I need to believe? Because once I believe, I can inspire everybody else and move things forward. And that is her gift. So she gets to look at where she is and go, where am I? Am I asking questions because I don't believe yet? That helps her frame up some of her questions, right? So she now knows this circle of getting to inspiration. And she wants the value to be inspiration. So it allows her to really integrate the shadow of how those questions are being asked to be like, am I doing this such that I can believe and inspire? Or is there something else going on for me? This little watch out about, is it the person that is, that she's skeptical about? Like, what else is going on? If it's not going to get her to believe and inspire, she's not going to show up really well. So there's such power in using it over and like you said, over and over again. Once we integrate, once we blend, once we're able to show appreciation for knowing those blind spots, knowing they show up and when they show up, there is such a gift for our ability to then adapt and become the person that we want to be versus letting the shadow rule how we show up.
Yeah. We have to be in our full awareness that these shadows are part of us And they are wonderful things that actually we learn from. And with that, let's go into the joy song of this session. And I am going to go with Chandelier by Sia. And the reason I picked that song is because in the lyrics it says, I'm holding on for dear life, won't look down, won't open my eyes. And it really talks about how the shadows are your strength, and how if you take the time to deeply go into them, you prevent yourself from self destruction. So, Beth, let's see what the
Yes.
joy and gratitude, the gratitude rocks have to say.
So I'm going to pause us for a minute. I'm going to do this a little bit
Oh,
differently.
goody.
And I've done this before, and I think it makes sense for this particular conversation, which is I'm going to choose a gratitude rock, but we're going to look at it, and whatever it is, we're going to use that word to show up with our shadow. So instead of just like thinking about it positively, a lot of us take the word and we move in that way. Like think about it as and I'll help us when we do it. But I have done this with a group, and it's been really beautiful because, like you said, we learn from our shadows. And right before I do this, I just want to say one of the most important things that Nio said earlier, and I want to double down on it before we end our conversation, is the need for help. So we talk about this, and Neo and I are both very open about how much help we get, right? Team Beth is a therapist, a somatic coach, or what. So it's not so easy to just go do this. You do need to ask other people to help you. So I don't want to pretend that this is just super easy. Ask your friends, family, ask a therapist, integrate in ways where other people can help you along. So just your interest in wanting to know is the very first step. So if you don't already know, take that first step. And then please know that this is something that other people can really help you with. So you mentioned the learning, and I thought, oh, I wanted to say that. All right, here I go for our gratitude shadow. Okay, enough. So here we go. Some of you probably already know how to integrate that, but this one is a beautiful example of, okay, if I had to think about enoughness, is there something related to a shadow for myself? And we all have them. But I'll use myself as like a little example. I know that I disintegrate into dominating, controlling person that I don't love when I don't feel like I am enough and I don't feel valued by other people. So enoughness is very closely related to a shadow. But I feel like I love enough, like holding this, because when I feel like enough and I can blend with I am enough, whether somebody else thinks it or not, that I know it in my heart of hearts, then I am able to show up as the human that I want. Like we are all enough exactly the way we are. But when we don't feel like enough, we can notice if that changes how we show up and try to come back to that inner knowing, whether that be to ground ourselves, to breathe, to have a beautiful conversation with an amazing friend, to let us know that we are enough. So that was just a real example of this beauty of blending and integrating with our shadows in a way that we just create more self love and more connection with those around us.
That is so beautifully stated. Um, that is such a powerful word, enough. Um, it really blends beautifully with shadows. Uh, I I'm speechless because that was a word that I had to literally um, take myself and wrap myself in last week. And through it, I kept finding examples that were unexpected, letting me know that I was enough because my shadows were very prevalent for many reasons. But just know, everyone, the shadows are going to be there. You are enough. You control your destiny. You control your journey. And we want to make sure that you know that you can do it with joy and gratitude. We can't wait to see you next time.